Hi, everybody. It's Katie McKenzie. I am here today with several legal and real estate professionals, all of who I've worked with as it relates to real estate. So I wanted to welcome today to our Zoom call. We have Zahra Walji. She is a notary with Boundary Notaries. We also have Jenna Lalani, who is a family law lawyer at DJJ Law. We've also got Mustafa Mohamedali, who's a lawyer and partner at Murphy & Company. And we've got Bronwyn Bertles, who's a realtor with Engel and Völkers. And again, of course, myself, Katie McKenzie, mortgage broker with TMG, the Mortgage Group. So what we wanted to do today was gather these professionals together, same as Bronwyn and I have done before, and give a little bit of an update as it relates to what each of these professionals do in their profession day to day, as it relates to real estate, and maybe a little bit on the side around that. So I'll welcome Zahra to take over for our first update. Zahra, take it away.
Thank you so much, Katie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zahra Walji, and I am a notary public at Boundary Notaries. So just a quick tidbit, we specialize in real estate conveyancing, personal planning such as wills, power of attorneys, rep agreements, and notarization. So the three main things that I'd like to talk about today, especially because of COVID, are talking about personal planning such as wills and power of attorneys, and remote signings with real estate and the personal planning side. So stats in Canada say that about 50% don't actually have wills or power of attorneys in place, but we've noticed that when it comes to real estate transactions, having a power of attorney has been helpful. So just wanted to do a quick difference between a will and a power of attorney. A will is an estate planning document after death. So what it does is it allows you to be able to control where your money or your estate property will go, and it helps you determine who is going to actually help you with selling the property, closing bank accounts, holding funds in trust for your little ones, and deciding who is going to be the guardian of your children. Without a will, what happens is you have to actually have it be done where an administrator is appointed, and it's done through the courts. Now, from what clients have told me, it's been taking 6 to 10 months and just to be appointed as an administrator, so you wouldn't even actually be able to make the decisions ahead of time. The other document are power of attorney documents. So that is during your life, making decisions, having someone appointed to make decisions for your financial and legal affairs. So that is if you wanted someone to sign on your behalf for your sale, so the transfer documents, and then actually collect funds and deposit for you, you could have a power of attorney in place. And if you actually were incapacitated, you could have someone be able to sign off on your behalf. Now, why it's important to have these documents in place ahead of time is because if you did lose mental capacity, they can't be created. So a family member or friend would have to be appointed as a committee. And when you're appointing committeeship, that can cost thousands of dollars. So the implementation that we have now is, with the exceptions in place, are that we are able to sign for personal planning documents electronically. So what our office has implemented at this time is doing the initial interview by phone, FaceTime, or Zoom, and providing the necessary legal advice that the clients would need, then sending the documents to review, and then either having the client just come in to quickly sign, or what they call electronic presence. So we would have the client sign the documents in front of us, like this Zoom call, and see them actually sign the document, and then have them send it back to us. Now, with these remote signings, we can sign in advance. So it would be where we're signing and then they're signing, and then we would have the document and send it off. The other factor that we can do is we can do remote signings for real estate. We have had a lot of pushback in our offices with real estate signings because a lot of the lenders aren't allowing it when you're purchasing a property. So these are some of the main concerns that we've had, or main things that we've been dealing with during COVID. If you have any other questions for all your happy law needs, contact me, Zahra Walji. Thank you.
Zahra, just to touch back on powers of attorney, because I know we've been working on this. So in not all circumstances may someone act on the power of attorney to transact real estate, correct?
Right, correct.
And how do they determine? So I know, I guess it's lender to lender specific.
Yeah, so most lenders, when you're purchasing, are not allowing power of attorneys to sign when you're buying, but they are allowing remote signings. So it's one of those where it depends on the lender and they're very specific. So we've had quite a few lenders actually say power of attorney, even if it's in place well in advance, they won't allow it.
Okay. And what if you have an elderly person or someone that is in quarantine? How do you enable the signings for them?
So what we have, like we've had a few clients, what we've done is we have, of course, the same measures in place that most businesses do, in the sense where there's masks, there's gloves, and we've been going to their place of residence and kind of signing outside of their window. So we see them, we're physically present at that point, but it's one of those where we've actually had that scenario itself.
Yeah. Brahma's just put in our chat here, can a buyer sign from another province?
So with the remote signing at this time, you are able to do that. However, again, it depends on the lender if they will allow it. So it's literally case by case, lender by lender.
Do you think we'll go back to disallowing this arrangement for signing post-COVID?
So it actually isn't a legislation that's being put into the Land Title Act for the documents. It's more so an emergency, part of the Emergency Act. I think eventually it will go back to where you do have to sign in person, more so because the main concern is fraud, right? So when you're signing remotely or not actually signing in person, fraud can occur, and that's the main concern that a lot of people do have.
Awesome. Anything else, Zahra, or shall we move forward?
I think that's good. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much. We're going to move over to Jenna. Jenna, take it away.
Hello, everybody. As Katie mentioned, my name is Jenna Lalani. I am a family lawyer at DJJ Law. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about during this unfamiliar pandemic, people are maybe moving in with one another for convenience, or just taking the next step and living their life and continuing to live their life. But some people are also not able to deal with their significant other and realizing this and on the cusp of separating. So two important things that I want you to keep in mind as I talk to you today, that when a spouse separates, property is subject to an equal division. And you don't need to be married to be a spouse. So living together for a period of 2 years makes a spousal relationship. So with that being said, I'm going to talk to you about a cohabitation agreement and a separation agreement. So how I look at it is you protect your life with life insurance. You protect your car with car insurance. You protect your vacation with trip insurance. You protect your house with insurance. You protect your, your well-being with critical illness insurance. Why should your assets be any different? What's the benefit of having a cohabitation agreement? Well, for starters, any property or any inheritance, investments, any increase in value during your relationship is protected. You've all heard the expression, the calm before the storm. Unfortunately, during a separation, there can be a storm, and having a cohabitation agreement in place before the storm can allow you to decide, support, how your assets are dealt with. Anything that you feel is necessary can be dealt with ahead of time and decided. Lastly, couples who do have an agreement in place can use this as your separation agreement. And for married couples, it could be your final divorce order. So there's less of a negotiation or waste of time later trying to agree on assets. It's already been agreed upon. as Bronwyn and Zhara can attest to, that the couple's always so excited about purchasing a new property or moving in with one another, and they don't necessarily think about having an agreement in place. And, you know, even Katie can attest to refinancing your property or getting approved for a mortgage in order to buy out a spouse in a separation agreement type scenario, that, you know, the lender often wants to know if there's support payments and how property was divided. And it's not necessarily just as simple as separating and going your separate ways. An agreement actually needs to be in place. But it's never too late to have an agreement. So people who are excited about, you know, moving in with one another, or even separated and 3 years down the road are purchasing a property, it's never too late to have this agreement. So I do think having a cohabitation agreement in place before you move in with one another is the best option, but you and your partner can sign at any time. Even if you've constituted that spousal relationship. So 5 years down the line, you know, things might be a little shaky, especially during COVID. Right now, you're in each other's space too much, and you want to put a cohabitation agreement in place just in case things don't work out. I've seen a lot of people who are signing 5 years, 10 years into their relationship, so it's never too late. I want to share common misconceptions really quickly about when couples separate. They often think that people, you have to be separated for a year before getting divorced. So people don't necessarily understand that and want to get divorced right away. That can't happen. And during this year, that's the separation period. That's the best time to have a cohabitation agreement in place. And that's the basis for your divorce order. So, you know, you're taking that year and you're using it wisely to have this, you know, flat fee of a separation agreement, as most lawyers do charge for their separation agreement. Whereas when you retain a lawyer for a divorce, it's often based on hourly fees, and it could add up and become more expensive. So, you know, in the long run, it is beneficial and more cost efficient to have that separation agreement in place if you were separating. But for people who are thinking of separating, or just not sure during this time as to how to navigate that, I'm happy to talk with them. There's things to always, you know, get your ducks in a row, so to say. So making sure that you have your tax returns done and you know what incomes you should be, or just having that cohabitation agreement in place as a what if. It's your type of relationship insurance. So make sure everything's checked off on the box along there. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them.
Just a comment. So I know that we don't want to get into pricing because that could change easily depending on how complicated the situation is. But generally speaking, the cohabitation agreement up front is also going to save you possibly not just the money that in the divorce or in the separation, but it could easily be a really small cost compared to how much purchasing the home would be.
Exactly, totally. And, you know, as I compare it to insurance, it's similar to that. You're paying, you know, your premiums once a month. This is the flat fee that you pay as your insurance, and you're not paying it later on. You're not going through that nasty divorce. And, you know, I know no one likes to think of the what if situation, but no, you know, fires happen, car accidents happen, people get sick. It's the things that you have insurance for. So having this in place would save you a lot of money later on, but also just that peace of mind that, you know, your assets are protected.
Yeah, I like to look at it like if you were to go into business with another individual, Jenna, if you and I were to buy a business together, we would have an agreement around how we enter into it, what happens while we own those assets together, and how we get out of it.
Of course.
And when people are in love, everything else goes out the window, and they don't see the value in paying this, you know, for the insurance, or, you know, protecting your assets. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Jenna, how reliable are they, I guess, once you separate? Are they usually overturned? Are they kind of kept consistent? What's the process?
The process, sorry, I missed the first part.
How kind of, I guess, enforceable are they really?
Yeah, your cohabitation agreements. I mean, you know, there's a lot that can change throughout your marriage, and you know, the time that you spend together is quite significant factor in that. Some people 20 years down the line who have an agreement in place, they do hold up, and circumstances do change. But what I want to say is that the ones that hold up, these agreements that hold up, are done professionally. They're done by, you know, lawyers who know the clauses, know what to put in there to ensure that they are enforceable. Whereas there's lots of softwares online, or, you know, a quick, easy, let me do it myself. And it's the same thing for a will, as Zahra knows. People like to do things on their own to hopefully save money, and it doesn't get held up later on. You know, the shorter relationships of 2 years or 5 years, if you did it yourself, you know, it could hold up, but having that done professionally, that's what's going to make sure that it gets held up the 15, 20 years down the line in the event that it gets needed.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna. Anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
No, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions at any point. My email address is jenna@djjlaw.com.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to turn it over to Mustafa. Take it over.
Hey everyone, thanks very much for having me. So my name is Mustafa. I'm a lawyer at Murphy & Company. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the legal implications the COVID pandemic is having on real estate transactions. Whilst things are starting to get back to some form of normalcy, I guess what are the options if you're one of those people who are facing the prospect of a real estate transaction collapsing? So generally there are kind of three broad reasons why a real estate transaction may collapse. Firstly, you've got a default or breach of contract. Secondly, you've got misrepresentation by a party or a mistake. And thirdly, it may be collapsing as a result of a frustration situation. So just kind of taking each one kind of in point, and this is very basic kind of headline points. So a default or breach of contract generally arises in one of the following situations. So the seller may no longer wish to sell the property or can't sell the property. For example, they don't have enough funds to give you clear title. The buyer may not be able to complete the purchase. For example, they may not have the financing to close the transaction or don't have the down payment. Another reason could be the buyer just doesn't want to proceed with it because of new circumstances, new information has come to light. For example, they may have lost their job. And then finally, you may have a situation where one of the parties has breached their obligations under the contract. So for example, they haven't paid the deposit on time, or they haven't provided you with the information that you need, you know, on time. Generally for kind of minor breaches, the innocent party must usually continue with the transaction, but their kind of compensation is they can sue for damages. For more serious breaches, the innocent party is generally relieved from having to complete the transaction, in addition to being able to sue for damages and things like that. Dealing with the second category, so a transaction may collapse if there's a misrepresentation or mistake. I won't go over the different subcategories of misrepresentation, but one of the most serious ones is fraudulent misrepresentation. This is where, for example, someone says something that they know to be completely false. A great example of this could be, for example, if someone said there aren't any special assessments or special levies pending or current, but actually the reality is there are. That would be considered to be kind of definitely misrepresentation. Mistake is usually used where kind of one or both parties is mistaken about the fundamental term of a contract. So for example, if let's say, you know, buyer and seller agree to buy a property for 100,000, but when it comes to the drafting stage, someone adds in a couple of zeros. Obviously, no one has to proceed on that basis because that was an honest mistake and a genuine mistake by everyone. Finally, you have situations where real estate transaction may be frustrated when the parties to the contract didn't foresee a kind of a supervening event which they had no control over. And then that made the contract kind of impossible to complete. So for frustration to succeed, both parties must be unable to carry out the contract, and the failure to do so must be beyond the control of each other. Just because it's more difficult or more expensive to complete the transaction is insufficient. And generally, it's been pretty difficult to argue, or successfully argue anyway, frustration in these situations. However, with, I guess, the COVID situation, it'll be interesting to see how this area of law changes and how the courts specifically will kind of treat it. So what are the remedies available to an innocent party if, let's say, you're facing a potential collapse? Generally, there are kind of four main avenues. The first is to retain the deposit. Most contracts include provisions that in the event the sale doesn't complete, the seller gets to retain the deposit. Secondly is you can sue for damages. So for example, if you have to put the property on the market again, you get a lower price, you may be able to sue for the kind of what the initial buyer was going to pay compared to what you actually get in the end. The third is rescission, which is basically putting everyone back into the position they would have been had the contract not have been signed in the first place. So you may have things like, expenses that people have incurred, legal fees, surveyor fees, and stuff like that, which one party may have to pay to the other party. And then kind of the nuclear approach is to sue for specific performance. This is basically where you tell the court, hey, I want to force this contract through. I don't really care what happens. And then the court makes an order. Generally, these are difficult to kind of succeed on and are extremely costly. So if you want to proceed down that path, then obviously you need to be very careful and make sure you have everything in order. So I guess the biggest question really the viewers want to know is kind of how you can prevent a real estate deal from collapsing. The answer is pretty simple actually, and it's by ensuring that you have kind of the right team behind you. Having like a realtor that knows what to look out for, make sure that there aren't any skeletons in the closet, having a mortgage advisor to kind of be able to deal with any financial changes quickly and efficiently, having a legal professional draft up the contract, make sure the contract does exactly what it's supposed to do, will all kind of help you avoid those pitfalls. Whether there's an increase or decrease, I guess, going forward in the number of collapse deals, we'll have to wait and see. But over the next, I guess, 4 to 6 months, that will be really telling.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you, is if you've seen an increase in these files coming forward.
We've seen a definite number of inquiries related to that. At the moment, I guess the courts are kind of just getting back up to kind of full efficiency. So, there isn't a quick answer to anything. So if you do want to go to court, it's going to be, months, if not years, to get to like the start to the finish. So people are looking at kind of alternatives and trying to reach a settlement on the side instead.
At what point would someone need to contact you? Like, if they sense something may not close, obviously if they know it's not closing and there's no negotiating with the party on the other end, at what point do you recommend they speak to you?
I think sooner rather than later is definitely the way forward. But, if you've got the right team behind you, they'll be able to tell you straight away, hey, look, you're facing a potential collapse. You need to think about your options. Speak to a lawyer about it or speak to a legal professional.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else have questions for him?
Not a question, but a comment, and I guess going to, exactly what I was talking about as well, that it's really important that things are done professionally or you have the right professional doing it. And I think that's a point that people often overlook. And I'm really happy that you said that because, again, it solidifies my point, but just really important to have a really good team behind you.
And there's some, as the realtor who's going to put these contracts together, we get our contracts looked at by lawyers annually and we adjust as needed depending on different things that are dropped into us. For example, vacancy taxes is a newer thing in the city of Vancouver. So we've got a clause now that protects and looks after that. But there are some things that we can do representing a buyer or a seller. One of the easy ones just to think about right off the front is if you're a seller and you have, if we have a feeling that that buyer might be, you know, not as legitimate as we'd like, or somebody that might be a little flaky, or just don't have that good feeling, or it's a really long close date, what we might ask for up front is a stronger deposit. So we might say, you know, normally it's 5% down, but in this case, we want something like 10, maybe 15% down, because you're 6 months away and stuff could change in the next 6 months. That way, that's one way to kind of protect or sort of find out how to make sure that we eliminate any risks of a collapse while representing our clients. So one of the things on the more complicated deals, when we're starting to look into the $3, $5, $7 million properties, is typically the negotiations happen over a longer period of time. It's not just overnight, you know, we get an offer, talk about it back and forth, done. And usually we recommend having a lawyer maybe review some of the aspects of it ahead of time, while also doing all of the due diligence possible in the subject removal period. So there's lots of things that we try to do to make sure we kind of minimize that risk.
Mustafa?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, from some of the recent contracts I've seen, they've even included things like automatic extensions if documents can't be signed on time. I've seen provisions in place where, you know, as you said, Bronwyn, if there's a extended kind of closing period, that allows and actually includes things like the seller's still allowed to market the property for like a backup offer.
Yeah.
And in the event that, you know, the first purchaser doesn't go through with it and it goes to the second one, then it's automatically written down that, you know, they'll pay the difference.
Right.
So it does kind of avoid a lot of uncertainty kind of going forward, and just gives everyone a bit of peace of mind.
Totally.
Awesome. Anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, I think that's it's me done.
Great. Let's take it over to Bronwyn then again.
Hi. So I'm Bronwyn. I am the residential realtor. I work part of a team. There's 5 of us realtors, and we have another 2 admin staff. And we're under the Engel and Völkers banner. So it's in 35 countries. A boutique firm. We have 3 offices, one in Kerrisdale, our head office in Yaletown, and then we do have an office in West Vancouver. We actually just secured a new lease. We've got a new designer going in there, and so it's going to be a really great office for all the North Shore people that are listening in. So what I've normally done on our little update is talk about the market, because that's what people really want to know about. The biggest thing that we kind of the overarching comments that we're noticing in the market is that we are still low. Over 10-year averages, we are low in both amounts of new inventory as well as sales. And what that has led to, though, is no real change in price. So the changes between February of this year compared to February of last year compared to March of last year are really very finite. So what we're seeing is kind of equal movement of both inventory and sales happening. So one of the things that I really like to focus on is our sales to active ratios. So that is kind of the absorption of listings in our in different markets. So anytime you're 20% or higher in your sales to active ratio, that means we're in a seller's market. So tons of buyers, low inventory. Between 12 and 20%, we are in a balanced market, and that's kind of the sweet spot where we'd like to stay. And then if we have under 12%, we're now in a buyer's market. So lots of options, few buyers, time to negotiate. So for the most part in the detached market, for Vancouver East Side, we're in a balanced market. For the West Side, we're just on the edge of a balanced market. North Van, we're still in a buyer's or in a balanced market, and in West Vancouver, we're in a buyer's market. So very balanced kind of across the board. And for the attached, so that would include townhouses. Vancouver East Side is actually in a seller's market. So we are low on inventory, and we've got lots of people that are active in that. Whereas, as well as in North Vancouver too. And then in Vancouver West Side, we are in a balanced market for condos and attached. So right now, if you are sitting in an apartment in North Vancouver or in East Vancouver, and you've been thinking, I need more space, now is a great time to make a move. So there's definitely these pockets that we can look at and see, that this might be a great option for you to really take advantage of the old adage, buy low, sell high. The other thing that we're noticing with COVID is just the change in people's mentality around their home. So we're seeing a lot of people say, okay, I actually do really want that third bedroom. I do really want that bigger space, and I do really want that backyard. And so I'm having a lot of conversations about moving into a detached property, let's say from an apartment or a townhouse. And it's really interesting. We're talking a lot about the balance or the difference between going to the North Shore or being in East Vancouver. The benchmark prices in both of those categories for a detached market are very similar. And so what's the difference? What does it get you? And so we're noticing, in the North Shore, you usually get a little bit more land, a little bit bigger backyards, bigger homes, but you've got some differences with proximity, whereas in East Vancouver, little bit smaller properties in terms of the land size, but we've got more access to possibly suites or income revenue through the property. So it's been interesting to see that in that kind of shift in people's minds. But I'll talk to you about what I worked on this last week. For example, went into multiple offers with the buyer on a condo in Port Moody. 8 offers on that property in and around the $700,000 mark. And then I wasn't part of the multiple offers on this one, but I did an East Van house with a legal suite, 3-bedroom legal suite in the basement. It had an income or a revenue generation of about $1,800 a month, and that one had 9 offers. So there's definitely pockets that are really busy and quite hot, and other pockets that are a little bit slower. If you are jumping from a smaller home and you're looking for that next level up or wanting something a little bit bigger, I think that this is a great time to be buying because, there's still some room to negotiate on those larger, newer, little bit higher priced properties. Yeah, kind of all. Oh, the last thing I was going to say too is we still don't have open houses haven't opened up. So that is still something that is a no-go. So one of the interesting things to watch for, and what we're starting to see pick up a little bit, on our MLS from the back end as the realtor, we now have access to put in a live stream open house. So that could be something very similar to a Zoom. So some of the ones I wrote down are obviously Facebook, Zoom, Google Meetups, Instagram, Zillow. YouTube has a YouTube Live feature as well as Vimeo. So what we're seeing now is the idea of marketing your property as if the buyer isn't in the city. So how do we make it so that you can feel safe at home and still see the property without causing any extra touching or any extra interactions? So now you should see some more open houses, and we're seeing some different timings of those as well. Like a Thursday evening is a popular one where you can kind of join in on a live stream open house before possibly setting up a private showing if that property does appeal to you. So I don't foresee open houses starting anytime soon. But so that's just definitely one big change that we've continued to work with.
So Bronwyn, you did say private showing. So if someone is interested in making an offer, they'd still have the option of making an appointment to see the home?
Definitely, yeah. So we still, for most properties are yes, private showings are no problem. A lot of the times the realtors will still try to put those into kind of a reasonable time frame. So you have 15 minutes, the next person has 15 minutes, the third person has 15 minutes, but yes, definitely doable. And it's interesting because we're seeing a bit of, it's very, because real estate is really putting a buyer and a seller directly together, which doesn't happen in a lot of other markets. It's very dependent on what the seller feels comfortable with in terms of, I want everybody in masks and gloves. I don't want anyone touching anything. We have other sellers that are a little bit more understanding or less cautious, saying no problem, I'll just do the cleaning for myself after the fact. But we're definitely noticing, and I think all of you are noticing that it's been a very personal, people have taken it very personal in their own personal way of doing things. So as an agent, we're just working within our confines to try to help make you feel comfortable, whether that's being extra cautious or not as cautious. And of course, it depends if the property is vacant or not, stuff like that.
Awesome. Does anyone else have a question for Bronwyn?
So I just have a question in regards to, I guess, within even the last week or so with the rules kind of relaxing, have you gotten a lot more calls in terms of wanting to actually sell and do that?
Yeah, so I think generally as people are starting to feel more comfortable, not only, I've actually had quite a few calls from out of province. The interesting thing is, well, we're seeing, what's happening down in the States, and then we're seeing how BC has handled COVID or a pandemic. And not only that, but I mean, we were able to be outside almost the entire time enjoying nature. Like Vancouver and Greater Vancouver, and I'll say BC in general, is an amazing place to live. And so I think we're seeing that people are saying, okay, I love it here. I do want to invest in here. I want to come from far and end up here, as a retirement. Or I'm really stable in my job and now I want to, grow my family here. And so, yeah, I think we're definitely getting more calls. Agents are busy. It's hard to get a photographer in. That's always a sign that the market's really picking up. And we were on schedule to have a very busy spring. And so I think this is just going to push that busyness to the summertime. And we're getting lots of calls. So it should be pretty interesting. We need lots of listings now. Otherwise prices will continue to rise.
Thank you.
No days off, hey Bronwyn?
No.
Well, I'll continue on then. Again, I am Katie McKenzie and I'm a mortgage broker with TMG, the mortgage group. And I wanted to speak to two things, I guess one overreaching thing that we're seeing as it relates to mortgage financing, and that's the tightening of rules. Now, we have COVID signing arrangements that have made the facilitation of submitting documents and signing documents easier, but what we're seeing on the flip side is the increase of mortgage fraud. So therefore lenders tightening up what they're asking for and how they're asking for it. So as an example, they are looking for very current income verification. So especially if you're self-employed, they're going to ask for 2 years tax returns. Depending on the industry you're in, they may want to see your current or year-to-date and or future contracts. If you're an employee, they want your pay stub within the most recent 2 weeks, as well as a letter of employment. And yes, they will be calling your employer, which right now can be confusing because the person who signs the letter, these may be auto-generated letters, may not necessarily be located at the phone number that's listed on the letterhead. So we've seen a bit of trouble trying to get a hold of people as well. And what we have also seen is rumors of lenders restricting other guidelines, such as the maximum debt to income ratios that they will lend to. So basically, when we assess how much you qualify for, we look at your income in and the debts out, and there's a magic number that you have to fit inside. And that's all based on the government stress test rate. So rates are low. The stress test rate has come down slightly, but we're starting to see lenders restrict this maximum debt to income ratio, specifically as it relates to high ratio mortgages. So these are people who are purchasing and have less than 20% down. About a week and a half ago, Evan Siddall from CMHC was quoted, or rather misquoted, as stating that they were looking at changing minimum down payment from 5% to 10%. What he was actually saying was it's prudent for any lender to look at the policies under which they lend. And if there was a scenario where this pandemic continued and home prices were to fall, should they be lending at 95% loan to value? So there is no change. That's what I want to make sure is clear. There is no current change as it relates to the minimum 5% down on the first 500,000 and 10% for value between 500,000 and $1 million. But the fact that someone is talking about it, a person in this position is talking about it, means it's on the table for discussion. Sometimes what we see are first-time home buyers who aren't really ready to buy, and they say, oh, well, give me another sort of 6 months, 8 months. But by the time you get to that end of that 6-8 months and you're ready or have saved for that larger down payment, the rules have moved and the goalpost is just a little bit too far away again. So my recommendation for anyone that is sort of on the fence or may not quite be ready, make sure you come in and have your numbers looked at. Speak to, obviously, I would love your business, but speak to your broker or your lender and see where you lie on that spectrum. If your lender is able to say, you know, based on your current income and current debts, we've got a lot of wiggle room. So if the rules change a little, you'd probably still qualify. That's awesome. But if, as I had a conversation with somebody today, I said, based on today's rules and the maximum amortization, you're right at the top of that price point window that you want to go in at. So if something gets tightened, now all of a sudden you're going to have to drop your price point by $25,000. And that's, you know, take out an extra bathroom or, you know, get a place that in a neighborhood you're not really looking to buy in. And of course, a lot of questions with regards to people who are self-employed. And I'll start this conversation by saying we don't have an answer to this, but people are saying, okay, if lenders most commonly use a 2-year average of income for those who are self-employed, what are they going to do for the 2020 year? If everything goes back to normal for the final 6 months of this year, will we take that 6 months and annualize it and use that as the income for 2020? Or will we use a 3-year average? And the answer is we do not know. And I know people work with their planners and accountants to perhaps draw out income in different ways for tax purposes. So my best advice to you in that regard is to definitely have a conversation with me on worst case scenario, if they're going to use your net income and not give any sort of add back for the fact that, you know, we've had the first 6 months of the year obliterated, and see what things there are that you can do in drawing income out, maybe from your holding company or operating company, to ensure that we bulk up your income if home ownership is within you know, a certain time window. If you're not looking to move or upgrade in the next 5 years, then maybe you can just bypass this year and it won't make a difference. But just reach out and ask those questions. Most of us in the industry are absolutely willing to answer these types of questions because for us, they're easy. You know, I know like Jenna offers, you know, a free introductory phone call. Ask the questions that you like answered. Don't ask your neighbor. You know, your mother or your father who bought 25 years ago. I know my mom bought in the 70s and still lives in the same house that she bought back then. So get the advice from the professional that deals with this, that's licensed to actually offer you this advice and is in it all day, every day. So those are the main pieces. So just tightening of rules, increase of document requests, and to answer Jenna's question to Bronwyn, I've seen a definite increase in calls and new deals coming in the last week. And so if there isn't supply in the market, you know, and there's that kind of demand, you're going to see multiple offers and prices selling for higher than people are expecting. That's all I have for my update this week. Does anyone have any questions for me? Bronwyn?
I do. So it's a kind of a discussion question, but I got a call from somebody saying, yeah, we're business owners. We want to get into the market. So we're thinking we'll just buy a pre-sale so we can put the money down now. And then we'll wait a few years and then qualify later, to which, of course, my eyes lit up because I know how risky that can be. But I think that this is a good question to bring up to people, is that what do you, pre-sale, can you, qualify? And if these things change, it can be detrimental to your investment. So, yeah.
Yeah, people don't realize that a rate hold, when you buy with a developer, there's usually somebody there from a major bank. Quite often it's TD, and they'll give you a rate hold, and people quite oftenly assume that means you're approved for financing, and you're not. All you've done is put a deposit down and entered into a contract for a closing at a future date. There are lenders. We have access to Scotia's what they call a builder cap rate program. The rates are terrible, but they will fully underwrite your file today, and based how long you want that file to stay underwritten, then the rates vary, but basically they'll fully underwrite the file as of today. But if you're a brand new business owner, a lender's not going to approve you today. So you're kind of banking on the fact that that new business will succeed. And in a first year, like everybody else who's self-employed knows, that first year is a zero, because you're putting everything back into the business and drawing next to nothing out for yourself. So it can typically take 3 full calendar years, or 3 full tax return years to see income generated and income coming out of that business. People will always ask too, they're like, well, why can't you look at the business revenues? And the answer to that is because you're buying it personally. The business isn't buying it. There are B lenders that will look at the revenues in the business, but they're not at best rates. So everybody always wants the best rate with the most flexibility. And I always say you can have everything you want, just not all together. So what we've seen during COVID is you squeak in under the line and it closes, or we have to go to a B lender and you get a little bit of a higher rate. But again, that might just be for a 1 or 2 year term, and then you can flip over to a standard A lender at best rates once you're showing that income to qualify. Or I shouldn't say worst case scenario, but most expensive scenario is we take that client private. And we've looked at that. I've actually looked at that this week, whereby they'll lend off of the current value. So typically they've put in, say, 20% down, and the property value's increased. So now we have enough to meet the private lender's minimum down payment requirements, but then you're looking at hefty fees and hefty rates just to close. And again, their terms are normally like a year. So is it risky? Yes. Can it generate a great return? Yeah, it can. And people have done that for years.
It was an interesting question it was interesting that they came to me because they said, oh, well, my friend did it. And I said, well, when did your friend do it? Well, they bought back in like 2013. I'm like, oh yeah, very different time. So I think it just goes back to Jenna's point, and the point that we've made over and over is just, you have to actually find a professional that's looking out for you, because your neighbor, although might have gotten a pre-sale and done really well, might not be in this industry.
Exactly. Yeah. Jenna, you had a question.
I did, and it goes to Bronwyn and Katie as well. But Katie, you mentioned, you know, the process of getting approved. So what you need, your tax returns, and you need, you know, the letter from your employer, and sometimes there's a delay with that. Do you find, or the two of you, that subject to financing period is in an offer is lengthened, and does it cause delay, or is it a little bit of a harmful situation if you are taking a little bit longer to get and secure that financing?
To be honest, the length of time and how long it takes totally depends on the client as well as the lender, and then how busy the client is and the lender is at the moment where we have that window. So ideally it's 5 business days. A month ago, I was saying, give me 10. But today we can get an appraiser in. A lot of the lenders were accepting automated valuation tools or drive-bys, so they weren't accessing the homes. So they were getting them done a lot quicker actually than actually trying to arrange a full appraisal inside the home. And a big part of that window is the pre-work. So I will always say to somebody, here's what we need. Some of it we can collect in advance, but the other part of it we can't. So say income verification. I'm not going to get that from you today, because if I do that 6 weeks down the road, you still haven't found a property, I'm going to have to get it from you again. But what we do have is an online portal, and in that portal I put the documents that I know are going to be asked for, and I'll put the very specific details in there that it must be within 14 days of when we submit to the lender, so the clients know that this document's going to be required. Who do I call? How does Katie get a hold of them so that the documents can be verified direct? So it's just giving a lot more direction to ensure that we can meet that time frame. We have had to ask for subject removal extensions, and they've been approved sometimes they haven't, and then the client's basically taking on the risk of whether or not they can remove the balance of their subjects. But I'll let Bronwyn speak to the negotiation around moving a subject removal date.
So what Katie said is totally right. Like, I don't have access to all of the details Katie does. So I try to get my clients to have everything in that they possibly can, so that when we're looking at a different price point, they're not worrying about the inspection plus worrying about getting all these documents together. So I try to focus on preparedness ahead of kind of shopping. With these 2 offer situations I just mentioned in the last 2 days, surprisingly, both of them had offers accepted with subjects. Now, I'm not privy to what those subjects are. Well, in one case I am, but basically I'm not privy to explain what the subjects are. But I would say that we aren't seeing subject-free offers. So not all that, there's few, but kind of out of 9 offers on that house, they accepted something with a weak subject. So I can only assume that would be financing. But having the open communication, and then trying to kind of figure out where their risk tolerance is, we would apply subjects that match their risk tolerance and due diligence period generally. And then in terms of asking for an extension, you guys are lawyers and negotiate all the time as well. The biggest thing is going to be coming to a win-win or a collaborative approach. So sometimes if you get more than, say, 5 offers, typically the seller will put a backup offer in place, and they'll say to us, nope, no extensions. We've got someone that's willing to buy right now. But for the most part, if they've given you, they like you, you've built up a relationship, it might be a matter of saying, we're going to remove all of our other subjects. So subject to documents, or subject to insurance, subject to inspection. We just need an extension on one subject. And this kind of gives the seller that hope that, you know, if everything else goes well, but there's no cookie cutter way of doing it. And again, it really does, it means working with the other side, honest and open communication, and then, just trying to make sure that we're evaluating risk at every corner.
I know sometimes I've done an assurance letter just to indicate to the seller's realtor exactly what it is that we're waiting on for the financing piece, that the buyer has been vetted. We're waiting, say, for the appraisal just to be received so that they can use that document as verification to say, oh, okay, this should be good. It's just this one last piece that we're looking for.
Yeah, and just like Mustafa said earlier, it's all about getting involved and getting ahead of it, starting and opening up the communication. Like if you feel like a deal's going sideways, it's best to get a hold of your lawyer now. If we see a problem with financing, it's best to let the realtor on the other side know right away. Because typically people are excited to close, like, you know, and want to get the deal done. So yeah.
Wow. Awesome. Does anyone have anything else? We're just 4 minutes out. We don't want to keep people longer than an hour here, but does anyone have anything else they wanted to add in? No? No? Awesome. Okay. Well, thank all of you for taking the time tonight to share of your knowledge. I will include all of your contact information. So for anyone watching, you can connect either with me or just directly to any of these wonderful professionals that have shared their time tonight. And my recommendation, as I think everyone has spoken to here today, is seek the advice from the professional that you need, build a good team, and yeah, reach out to any of us. We'd be happy to have your business. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.